Well, we now start. I declare the ordinary meeting of council held at Triabunna council offices on the 27th of October open, and I welcome councillors and staff. The meeting has started at 2 p.m. The Glamorgan Spring Bay Council acknowledges the traditional owners of our region and recognises their continuing connection to the land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Now, present, there are Councillors Bruni, Robinson, our General Manager, Councillor Churchill, Councillor Simons, and Councillor Arnold, as well as the Deputy Mayor, Jenny Woods. There are two staff members present, and I think I now get on to the next item.
Apologies, Councillor Brown.
Oh yes, I forgot apologies. Councillor Annie Browning, her husband's ill, she's still in Queensland. We don't have any other apologies, do we? The next item is the presentation of the Certificate of Appointment, Municipal Emergency Manager Coordinator, Ms. Bev Allen. Bev, would you come forward, please? It's with great pleasure that we present you the certificate signed by the Minister for Police, Fire and Emergency, and thank you, Municipal Coordinator.
Thank you so much. And it's an honour to represent council, and let's hope we don't have any emergencies. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you,
Now,
Dave.
the next item, 1.5 on the agenda, is commitment to the Statement of Expectations, issue resolution policy number 67, and I hand over to our General Manager, Greg Ingham.
So the statement, I acknowledge that I have been selected by Council to a position of significant responsibility with the expectation that I will act in accordance with the principles and behaviours of good governance. I declare my commitment to abide by this expectation by attesting my adherence to the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council Statement of Expectations Policy.
Thank you, General Manager. Are there any late reports? No late reports? Are there any declarations? I'm sorry.
Mate, was there a late agenda item with regards to the East Coast Regional Tourism Board?
No, it was just, I think it was just going to be
Added.
advised. No, there wasn't a late report for that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest or conflict to be made? Any councillor? No declarations of interest or conflict? Next item is confirmation of the minutes. Now, the ordinary minutes of Council 22nd September have been circularised. And do I have a motion that those minutes are to be confirmed as a true and correct record? Councillor Robinson, thank you very much. A seconder? Councillor Arnold, thank you very much.
That the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council held Tuesday 22nd of September 2020 at 2 p.m. be confirmed as a true and correct record.
Now we have a mover and a seconder. Do you mind if I put the motion? All those in favour?
Before you go, is there any discussion on that?
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm pushing it a bit too quickly. Does anyone want to make any comment about those minutes or discussion about them? if I can put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Now, there were workshops held on the 13th of October in accord with the requirements of Regulation 8(2)C of the Local Government Meeting Procedures. It is reported that a council workshop was held from 1:30 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. 13 October at Council Offices, Triabunna. Now, do you want, Councillor Brenny?
I believe I'll be able to move that these council notes this information.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Churchill. Now, from a procedural point of view, does anyone want to discuss that? Do we require a motion that it be put? I ask that that motion be put. All those in favour? Those against? I declare carried unanimously. Item 3, I think, is public question time. There are some questions without notice.
No. There's no questions without notice, but there are questions.
Thank you. I've been reminded that there are no questions without notice. There are questions on notice. Now, I don't know whether it's necessary for me to read those questions out loud. Well, there are 3 questions, and
They've been
one
answered.
from Mr Kickett, one from Ms Samantha Batchelor, and one from Mr De La Torre. Now, the first question, I think, concerns a councillor personally, and the question doesn't concern any business or activities of council, and then on that basis it's not accepted, and therefore no response will be provided. On the question from Samantha Batchelor,
I was going to respond to that one. If you...
and I asked the General Manager to deal with that question.
So the councillors, the question there, as you can see, is in regards to council's decision in closing down the visit information centres, and specifically around consultation with stakeholders in the Tasmanian government. State Growth did engage a consultant to conduct a gap analysis based on a survey of stakeholders, and this was used by State Growth to establish alternative models for visitor information centres generally. I make that comment also because there is other councils in Tasmania that are in a similar situation to us. Due to the decision to roll out the travel vouchers, I hope some of you had more success than we did. Make Yourself at Home campaign in a short time frame. This was seen as the priority for State Growth resources at the time. Council are waiting for a further update from State Growth on the pilot projects that they have been considering. Council have made an announcement in relation to the arrangements with Parks and Wildlife to lease the Triabunna Visitor Information Centre, as you'd be aware. And Council staff are working and have worked with Parks very closely to ensure a smooth transition for the rest of October, which is October the 31st being the date of the transition.
Now, there was another question, was there not?
Yep.
And as to question 2 from Samantha Batchelor,
This
yeah,
was addressed to you.
this question relates to personnel matters, and on that basis it's not accepted and no response will be provided. The question from Mr. De La Torre. My response is that I'm unable to confirm if the matter of signing the pledge has been discussed among councillors. However, I can confirm that the Spring Bay councillors, Glamorgan Spring Bay councillors have, by signing their individual declarations of office and by abiding the statement of expectations, have declared that they'll comply with the council's code of conduct and act in the best interests of their community and the council. Our next item on the agenda is which one? I've turned over 2 pages. Okay. Responses to previous questions on notice, 22nd September. There has been a response signed by the General Manager to Mr. De La Torre. There has been a response signed by the General Manager to Mr. Kickett, and there has been a response to Dr. Robin Moore, signed by the General Manager. Now, there are no reports in the Planning Authority section. We now come on to the financial reports. Financial reports for the period ending 30 September 2020, and I hand over to the General Manager.
Councillors, the report's taken as read. I think the important thing to note in the financial statement is and if you look at the last report.
Just a point of order there, sorry, Mr.
please.
Ingham. We need a motion first to discuss. To receive the motion, to receive the reports,
Yep.
and then we can head on into the discussion, so.
Well, I'm sorry about that
This one.
once again, going a bit too quickly. I ask for a motion that the council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ending 30 September 2020. Councillor Bruni, thank you very much. Councillor Simons, thank you very much. Any discussion?
No.
I think I need to, instead of,
So please go
Mayor,
ahead.
through you,
I'm doing it a bit quickly again.
well, it's just that it may be that rather than you stating the officer's recommendation, the person who wants to put the motion states their motion, whether it's in recommendation or
I
whatever.
stand corrected. Please do that, Councillor Bruni.
I move that council receives and notes the financial reports as attached to this report for the period ending 30th September 2020.
Councillor Simons, second. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Bruni?
No, that's the report itself speaks for itself. However, there may be a requirement for some matters to be raised in relation to any issues, but you can direct council to that.
Councillor Simons, do you wish to speak to that?
No, that's fine. I have some questions as we move into discussion.
Now,
I've just got a comment to make. That's all right.
General Manager, do you want to make a comment about it?
If I go back, a comment through you, Mr. Mayor. Just to remind council of our position with our grant funding this year, that being it's the sizable program that it is in total. I think the federal grants, as you can see on the statement, nearing 8 million. We are in a position where we believe we're going to expend half of that right now, and I'm hoping that that situation improves as we head towards the end of the financial year.
Anyone else want to make any comment? Councillor Churchill?
Just a question there, if I may, to the General Manager through the Mayor. Just on the statement of financial position. On the fixed asset water at cost, I assume that is the raw water system, is it? Prosser Plains raw water scheme.
Councillor, I would assume that too, but not with 100% confidence, so
No, that's
I
okay.
can confirm that with you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just, it was just sort of sitting there as 6 million that I wasn't sure about.
It hasn't
So,
been identified as Prosser in the report, but
Yeah.
I think you are right. But I'll get back to
Thank you.
Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is to the General Manager, through you. It relates to page 19 and the notes, which states that employee costs are down. And I would be interested to know why that is the case when we've had so many acting general managers and consultants. And I'm just wondering where those costs are allocated. And is it possible for council to receive a total of the costs in relation to the acting general managers that we had over the last several months? I'm not asking for what each individual general manager, just what the total cost of having acting general managers may have cost us. And I accept you may need to take that on notice, Mr General Manager.
Councillor Arnold, certainly the second part of that question I'd like to take on notice. In regards to the first part, I think part of the employee costs being down is there has been, over a period of time, you would be well aware of staff, both resignations and redundancies. Redundancies come with a cost, but there have been quite a few resignations as well, so that would be reflecting in those figures. But I'll take your question on notice about the overall cost of the previous general managers.
A transition period, if you like, Mr General Manager.
Which I assume, Councillor, you are talking from the end of Mr Metcalfe's tenure to now.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, there's to you, General Manager, there has been some questions asked within the community. We have consistently put out there that council has had some financial problems, and so we've had people in the community, I've had people ask me, so how much does it cost to go through this transition period? And from an elected member's perspective, I'd be interested in that as well. So thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Robinson.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Just on page 18, under other income, it's the Prosser Plains Raw Water Scheme reimbursement of principal loan. I note that our budget is 99,690. Does that sort of imply there that we actually haven't received anything from the company using the water at the moment?
Correct. Councillor Robinson?
Okay, and is there any indication as to when we might receive some money?
There is some discussions going on around a related matter that will have an outcome on this. I can't comment much more at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Simon.
Just going back to page 19 and Councillor Arnold's note number 8 there. It says employee on costs are down 176,000 Ks. Now on costs, I assume, workers' compensation, which is what it says there, largely due to the payment of workers' compensations insurance quarterly rather than annually. Is at $176,000 for the quarter, that doesn't add up for workers' compensation costs. That would be way above. I don't think we'd pay that in a year, let alone a quarter.
700,000 effectively.
716,000 if you expand it out to a year. But so is that an error through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager? And I'm happy for you to take it on notice, of course.
Councillor Simons, I'm reading that as that is reflective of the year, but the statement is saying that they're down due to the payment, the quarterly payment, but I think that figure is reflective of the financial year.
Okay.
That's the way I'm reading that.
Any other questions? General Manager, I'd like to ask a question if I may. The first one relates to the payment of money for the provision of water. Is that payment due under the contract annually in arrears or at some other time, or don't you know?
It's annually in arrears. That's
And
where the
is it financial year annually or 12 months from the first supply of water, or don't you know? I'm asking a difficult
Yeah,
question.
Mr Mayor, I'll have to take that one on notice. I'm not sure.
Is it all right if could I,
Please, go ahead, councillor
my
Churchill.
understanding is the current payment starts from when the water was first made available, when it was commissioned, that's for this year. But each year, the payment is to be made in October in arrears for that year. That's my understanding of the
So-
contract.
As you understand it, councillor Churchill, am I correct in summarising what you say, that we might expect a payment if we make demand for it sometime shortly after the end of this month?
I would assume it would have to be billed. I wouldn't know the procedure there. That's operational. I'm not sure what the operational process would be, but I would imagine it would be billed to the respective company.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question on page 20 of the statement of financial position under liabilities, current liabilities, trust funds and deposits. I'd like to know what they are. Can you tell me?
Mr Mayor, I can't tell you, but I will take that question on notice.
Thank you very much. Now, I don't think we put the motion yet, have we? Well, councillor Breeny's motion, all those in favour, please raise their hand. Against? Carried unanimously. Now, the next item is, I think, on page 25, section 24, committees. Now, there is a recommendation that the minutes of the section 24 committee, Triabunna Recreation Ground Advisory Committee annual general meeting held on 1st July 2020 be received and noted. Can I have a motion to that effect, please? Right.
I'll move that.
Deputy Mayor Woods, thank
Yep,
you.
I'll move that the minutes of the Section 24 Triabunna Recreation Ground Advisory Committee Annual General Meeting held on the 1st of July be received and noted.
Can I have a second? Oh, thank you, councillor Breeny. Is there any discussion from anyone, either for or against?
Just
It's
noted.
just noted
I
and
see.
accepted. Yeah.
Well, do we need a motion that, sorry, this motion I suppose we now put, saying we've got a...
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Next item is on page 27, minutes of the Section 24 Triabunna Recreation Ground Advisory Committee meeting 1 July 20. There is...
Mr Mayor, I'll move. Can I move that
Yes,
the
please.
minutes of Section 24 Triabunna Recreational Ground Committee general meeting held on the 1st of July 2020 be received and noted?
Thank you, councillor Arnold. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Simons, thank you very much. Is there any discussion?
No, there can't be.
Well,
They just
the
noted.
Deputy Mayor's reminded me I can't have discussion on this, so I now put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, the next item, I think, is on page 29, which, in terms of reference, Section 24 Special Committee, Coles Bay Community Hall Committee.
I can put that information if you wish.
Thank you, councillor Churchill.
I move that Council endorses the Glamorgan Spring Bay Council Section 24 Special Committee, Coles Bay Community Hall, terms of reference as attached to this report.
Can I have a second? I have a second. Thank you, councillor Simons. Now, is this one of these motions where we have discussion? Well, Deputy Mayor tells me we can have discussion. Does anyone want to talk? Oh, councillor Churchill, thank you.
As the mover of the motion, if I may. Yeah, it's just good, if I may make the comment, it's just good to see that the Coles Bay Community Hall Committee has been re-established after a very stagnant 2 years of doing very little. And the community has now got behind it and started to bring it back to function again, and it's good to see that happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder, want to say anything? No. Thank you very much. Well, I now put the motion. All those in favour? Against? I declare that the motion is carried unanimously. Now, page 30, officers' reports requiring a decision. Instrument of delegation, council to the general manager. Now, I'm not quite sure how to handle this. I know what it is.
So
but,
There's a motion.
motion there, recommendation there, so
It's
you
on
need to
the
move.
Page 32.
Page 32,
Oh, I see.
so you need to.
Well, can I have someone that moves in accord with the recommendation on page 32, A and B? Councillor Churchill.
I move that Council A delegates the powers and functions contained within the instrument of delegations to the General Manager, and B, authorises the Mayor and Deputy Mayor to sign and affix the Council seal on the instrument of delegation.
Now, is a seconder? Thank you, councillor Robinson. Mover, councillor Churchill, do you wish to make any comment? Just for the general public so they know what this is about, if for no other reason?
Yes, I would just like to make the comment that a workshop's been held to discuss these delegations, which are quite extensive. A lot of work has gone into that, and I personally feel comfortable with the delegations as they have been made and put into this, attached to this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson,
No.
any discussion? Well, I put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, the next item, I think, is on page 33. Council representation on section 24, special committees of council. Now, there's a recommendation on page 34. Can I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, could I?
Yes, please.
Could I
Councillor,
ask a point of clarification
Yes,
before we
please.
go there? Are we nominating councillor representation for each of the section 24 committees as identified in the officer recommendation, or are we only seeking recommendations for representation on those council positions that are now, if you like, vacant because of previous because of resignations from
I don't
council?
understand it.
That's where
It's
I'm
the
a wee
latter.
bit confused about.
Yeah, it's as, through you, Mr Mayor,
Yeah, please.
Councillor Arnold, it's through, as per the recommendation. So,
All of them.
correct, so we'll include the previous Councillor Wisby's representation on the committees and Councillor Pike. Yeah,
Okay. So it's every single one.
yes, and in the attachments, you will have the committee, a table of the committees and their representation.
Just remind me what page that's on, Mr General Manager.
77, Councillor
67,
Arnold.
thank you.
77.
77, thank you. I saw it when I was going through.
The executive officer just reminded me that if if the council was happy with the current makeup, and we still have to replace ex-councillor Wisby and ex-councillor Pike, but there doesn't need to be any debate around the others.
Please.
Comment, read across the river mouth Master Plan Advisory Group. It has currently 3 councillors on it. Under the guidelines, there are should only be 2 councillors. So we went with Mayor Wisby not being on that anymore. We could, I guess, leave that one as the remaining 2 councillors.
So is that really a point of order that we would be seeking to have more council representatives on that particular committee than is allowed if we proceed with
I
this?
think we've been against our guidelines for the whole time since that committee was formed.
Now, Deputy Mayor Woods.
If I may, I was actually on that committee, but I resigned very, very early on, Councillor Churchill, due to never being able to make the meetings because of the times that they were on. So there was really only 2 there.
So
Need one.
we still need one
Need
more to
one.
go. So you're not on there actually. Okay, right, sorry.
No, I did actually resign from it.
So really, I'm sorry.
Sorry, could I just send
Yeah,
in?
please.
If we are to work through every single committee, then it's going to take a significant amount of time.
What's your
Mayor,
recommendation?
could I suggest
Yeah.
that for this particular meeting, we only deal with those vacancies? That is the Marine Infrastructure Committee, the Buckland Hall Committee, Triabunna Hall Committee, and the Prosser River, or Triabunna Recreation Ground and the Prosser River. So the ones where Councillor Pike and, former Councillor Pike and ex-Mayor Wisby are noted. It's in the past, if I may, just as a little bit of history for you, Mayor, and for the General Manager, what we have done, and Council will remember, is that we have actually looked at the committee structures in a workshop, and councillors have identified their interest in particular matters, in particular committees. So for the purposes of this, my personal view is that we would be just wise probably just to deal with those vacancies today.
Now, we've got a mover and seconder, have we not, of this
No.
motion? Not yet?
We need one.
So if that's the case, Councillor Arnold, would you like to move that the recommendation
No, well,
deal only with those items?
Well, Mayor, it's going to be pretty hard, I think, because I think whilst the recommendation is there to do all committees, I think each committee where there is a vacancy needs to be dealt with individually, so that councillors in the room can indicate an interest in that particular one. So I'd be happy to start that off, but we really need to know. It's just going to become quite messy. I think we really need to know who has an interest, say, for example, in the Marine Infrastructure Committee, so that we can work through it and then move a motion to have that person.
Go on.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so we can change the recommendation to reflect that we are appointing the 4 committees that you mentioned to replace Councillor Wisby and Councillor Pike, and that all the other committee representatives remain the same.
Okay, well, I'm happy to do that.
Well,
All right, so if I may, Mr. Mayor,
please.
I'll move that council determine council representatives on the 4,
Did you think you had
5,
That's right.
Section 24 special committees of council where there are currently vacancies, and that the balance of the committee representations remain as noted in the agenda.
So going back to the section 24 committees.
5 Section 24 committees where there is currently a vacancy.
Do you wish to name
I
those
think we should-
committees?
We'll have to deal with them.
we should name them through you, Mr. Mayor.
Well,
Okay,
I'd
so,
like to
all
have
right,
a
so
name.
the Marine Infrastructure Committee.
Perhaps on the following 5, do you want me to?
On the following 5, yes, that's all right, that's fine. On the following 5, Section 24, where there is currently a vacancy.
Marine
And-
Infrastructure Committee.
Yeah, so the Marine Infrastructure Committee,
Hall
Buckland
Committee,
Hall,
Triabunna Hall,
Triabunna Hall,
Triabunna
And-
Recreation Ground,
Triabunna Recreation Ground, and
Prosser River
Prosser
Mouth.
River. Is that only 5?
Yeah, that's
It
fine.
is 5, okay. And the balance and the representation of the other committees remain
So,
as noted in the agenda. Is that? Sorry, it's a little bit messy, I'm sorry, but is that?
That's
is that
understandable.
where
I can follow
that's
it.
where
If
we're
I
going?
can follow it, I'm
Okay,
sure most
that's good.
everyone else can.
All right.
Could I just,
So-
through you, Mayor, could I just say in the Appendix A of the agenda?
Thank you.
So remain as noted in Appendix A
Yep.
of the agenda.
So, if I may, for a point of clarification here, Mr Mayor, this motion will need to be put and then we'll need to work through with the councillors who is interested in the vacancies. Is that where we're at?
How about we just deal with your motion now? And now, is there a seconder to that motion? Right, councillor Bruni, I think he put his hand up first. Do you wish to speak any further to it?
No, Mr Mayor, I think it'll just be a process from here to actually appoint people to those 5 committees. So we get this motion through and then we can deal with those representations.
Thank you. Councillor Bruni, do you wish to say anything?
That's fine. As I see it. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to make any comment or have a discussion on the matter? Being no one else, I now put the motion as amended.
Do
No,
we need
just
to-
put the motion.
The motion.
Do we need to put the names in first, or do we need to deal with the names first?
If I may, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Churchill, I think we need to deal with this part to get the process started.
Okay,
And
sorry.
then out of this, the way I see it, out of this motion is going to drop another motion that will name the councillors that has an interest in these particular sections. Is that,
Nominate them.
would you agree with that, Councillor Bruni, if I may?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that seems sensible to me for the moment. Next step next. All those in favour of the motion, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, Councillor Arnold, you have a view what ought to follow next. Could you let us know, and I assume you think there ought to be a motion?
Well, there will be, but we need to know which of our current sitting councillors have an interest in any of those committees, Mr Mayor, and if I,
That's right, no, that's fine.
and if I may, I would like to put my hand up for the Triabunna Recreation Ground Advisory Committee, if that's acceptable to the other councillors.
Look, if we start with the first, the marine one, and work our way through the list.
Well,
I could put my hand up because I have an interest in the Marine Infrastructure Committee.
anyone else want to put their hand up?
Okay.
Well, if that's the case, Councillor Robinson.
Triabunna
Now,
Hall.
the next one is the Buckland Hall Committee. Who has an interest in that?
The Buckland Hall Committee.
Do we in fact, if I may, do we actually need to on that?
Actually,
I would have thought one person might be
Yep.
sufficient on that. if
We,
that's a-
Councillor Browning is already listed on that particular committee anyway, so,
On these numbers
so,
in the constitution.
and if I may,
Please,
if I may, Mayor, there's a couple of, I did actually look at this and think, why have we got 2 representatives on, you know, the hall committees when there's really only needs to be 1?
If I can just make a comment about that, I think that is specified in the terms of reference for the
yeah.
Section 24 committee, so there'll have to be a whole, if you're going to change the number, council, there'll have to be a whole new
Yes.
important resolution about
Yes.
that.
I have been a member of the Buckland Hall Committee before, and if Councillor Browning, I'm sure Councillor Browning will remain on there, but because it's close to my home, I'm comfortable, and it's not a particularly onerous job. They don't have that many meetings, so I'd be comfortable to be on the Buckland Hall Committee.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to challenge for the burden to be on the Buckland Hall Committee? Well, if that's the case, Councillor Arnold. The next one is the Triabunna Hall Committee. Now, that I suspect would be reasonably convenient for most of us at some stage or other. Who wishes to put the hand up to be on that committee?
Why don't you?
It's all I can do to understand what's going on. And I really don't want to have to understand anything else that's
Okay,
going
fair
on
enough.
until I've had some experience. And you're a very good guide to me, and so is Councillor Arnold and the General Manager.
I think Councillor Robinson would be suited to this position, and
Yes,
he's
it's
geographically.
I was
nice
only
and
scratching my finger, Councillor Churchill. I was,
That's
but it
like,
appears I might have
Well,
nominated
Councillor
myself.
Robinson, you've got the prize.
Okay.
Now, the next one is the Triabunna Recreation Ground Advisory Committee. Deputy Mayor, you're on that.
Yes, I am.
Who else would like to go on that?
Councillor Arnold.
that's the
Councillor
one that
Arnold
I've put my
expressed
hand
an
up
interest.
for.
Oh, yes,
that
that's
bit,
right,
but,
well, you're there. So,
but I'm happy to be challenged if
no,
anybody
well,
else
does
would
anyone
like.
want to challenge Councillor Arnold? They'd be a brave person if they did.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Prosser Mouth
Master
Master Plan Advisory Group.
I-
Now, you'd be
I-
doubly brave to do that.
Yeah, I have an interest in that,
Oh,
a
well,
serious
maybe,
interest, so I'm
Councillor Robinson.
happy to do that one.
Yes. Well, now, we've got the people
So,
to be on
Mr.
that
Mayor,
committee. Do we need a
If I
motion?
may, I will move that Councillor Robinson be appointed to the Marine Infrastructure Committee, Councillor Arnold to the Buckland Hall Committee, Councillor Robinson, Triabunna Hall Committee, Councillor Arnold, Triabunna Recreation and Ground Advisory Committee, and Councillor Robinson, the Prosser River Mouth Master Plan Advisory Group.
Is there a seconder for that difficult motion?
And it'll just need to be.
Hang on.
Oh, look, Councillor Churchill, it's your turn. Now, do you wish, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Arnold?
So who did, Councillor Churchill seconded?
Yes, yes.
Councillor Churchill seconded that,
Yes.
right? Lovely. All right. No, I don't wish to speak to it, Mr Mayor. I think
Thank you.
we've very amicably sorted it out, so.
Councillor Arnold? Oh, sorry, Councillor Churchill, do you wish to speak?
No, just, I
Well,
think it's good
seeing
to
that
give.
no one's speaking to it, any other discussion?
The way she typed it.
Please, General Manager.
Sorry,
No?
excuse me, Mayor. Can I just clarify, was Councillor Arnold, Councillor Robinson or Councillor Churchill second? Councillor Churchill.
I seconded the motion.
What Councillor Churchill say? I'm sorry, we're going too quickly. Your typing is very skillful. No better than any of us.
Just if I
Please,
may,
yes, go on.
I don't think that's quite right, Mrs.
No, it's the moving and the
It's,
second.
moved Councillor Arnold, seconded Councillor Churchill, but I think I can't,
Oh, yeah. Seconded.
it's Councillor Robinson to Marine Infrastructure. And you might need to just set it out just a little bit differently, but that's fine, yeah.
I'll just chuck second.
Seconded, yeah, seconded instead of that.
Moves Councillor, seconded Councillor
That's
Churchill. That's it. Great.
Yeah.
Through Mr Mayor, can I just make a general comment
Please.
about the Prosser River Advisory Group Committee? There is, Council would be well aware that there's a fair bit of community interest in the Prosser River. I have met a few people down there of varied interest, and I know Councillor Robinson has recently as well. And thank you for your putting your hand up for that one. But I think we're going to have to very quickly look at how this group is going to function going forward, because my take on it, there doesn't seem to be, if there was a middle ground to be met, I'd be quite confident that this group could move forward in a positive way. But at the moment, it doesn't seem as if that middle ground exists, if I can just leave that comment there. And if someone has a plan, please talk to me.
But if I may, oh, sorry.
If I
Oh,
may,
yes, sorry, Councillor Green.
through the Mayor to the General Manager, as a full-term member of that Section 24 committee from its inception, I agree with you on your perception of what the situation is currently, and I would welcome a re-look at exactly where we're at and what our future would be. I think it's imperative because of perceptions of a lack of common ground and the need to definitely come up with a solution to the issue, because it is one that needs a solution. It may be painful, but it's something that needs to be done. And I welcome the fact that Councillor Robinson has joined the committee, and I would recommend that we do move forward on this, because it's been going for way too long and it needs to be resolved. Thank you.
Well,
Mr Mayor, if
Yes,
I may
yes,
I?
councillor.
Councillor Bruni and Councillor Robinson will probably recall that we did have a workshop on this to try and move it forward, and I don't believe I've ever heard the outcome from that workshop. So there may need to be, with respect, Mr General Manager, there may need to be some investigation into what the outcome of that workshop was.
Councillor Brandy, do you wish to respond?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Councillor Arnold. Yes, definitely. There was an approach to have Parks and Department of Parks, it's called DPIPWI, take the initiative and prepare a management proposal that would make sure that the state took far more of control of that situation. The resolution of that hasn't yet been finalised, but hopefully that was the last move. We were trying, in a way, to have Parks take much more control over what went on, because we saw them as a state body that may have had more control over exactly what should and could be done in a practical way. But whether or not that's proceeded any further than Parks saying that they'll proceed with looking at it, I don't know.
If I may follow on from
Yes,
Councillor
please, go
Brandy.
ahead.
Mr General Manager, that what actually happened was that Parks, if you like, became supposedly involved in the process because of the uncertainty around the leases that's in that area. So that's where you probably need to have a follow-on with that.
Through you, Mr Mayor,
Yeah,
Councillor
please,
Arnold
General Manager.
and Councillor Bruni, yes, there is, the leases is one matter. I think there's also the matter of a management plan, so to speak, being prepared, not by Parks, by, I don't know, a member of the public, for want of a better word, and that is a bone of contention in itself, and that's, I don't think the workshop you're referring to that wanted Parks, or recommended that Parks take more ownership, I don't think that's come to fruition.
No.
But there is a management plan to just go on from Councillor Brini's query. There is a management plan that exists for the area.
I'd like to make a comment, if I may, if everyone else is finished. Oh, please go ahead, Councillor Robinson.
Through you, Mayor, just adding on to what people have said there, at that workshop, it was my understanding that Parks and Wildlife agreed to provide some expertise for us, and on the basis of working with council. And I think the General Manager is correct in saying that we haven't heard any more in regard to that proposal.
Well, I'd like to make two comments, if I may, unless other people wanted to make any further comment. I have seen a development application relating to an area, I think, just outside number 63 Tasman Highway, Jamie Saunders' place, I think, where the...
Point of order, Mr Mayor, can't name people.
I'm sorry. Well, he wasn't the developer, and it wasn't his application. I've seen outside number 63, development application appears to be by the Crown, and they have certain obligations to, under that, the permit granted pursuant to that development application, to do works on the backwater area there, and by regularly keeping it open to the Prosser River. And that appears, from what I can gather, not to have been done. And I don't quite know where all that fits. I have seen some plans of leases, Crown leases, over that area, and Mr Butler, who's doing some research on assets for the council, the engineer here on contract, has produced a plan that shows the various titles, but who owns the freehold and who has a lease over that is another matter altogether. Because I imagine that the Crown will not have submitted a development application over to council over land it owns, so there must be some sort of lease from the Crown land or land owned by the Crown in right of the state of Tasmania and its instrumentalities. It must be some sort of lease to the council, otherwise the Crown would not have submitted the application, or development application, and if that development application is current, there appears to be an outstanding obligation for them to do works to open up the backwater to the Prosser River. And that seems to clash very much with the general intent, I suppose one could say, about preserving the habitat of the fairy terns and the hooded plover. So that's one matter. I've just made I'm going to make a suggestion, and I'm not on the committee, but if we're going to get any resolution, it'd be far better if we could work from matters, starting with matters upon which we all agree, and then leaving the contentious issues last. Because you're more likely to get a resolution out doing it that way than starting off with the things where the fight's going to be. Anyway, that's a comment I've made, and we haven't put the motion. Now, all those in favour of the motion, please raise their hand. Against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, the next item, I don't think is going to be quite as difficult. That's on page 35, item 7.3, revised draft asset management plan. And, I'm sorry.
I'll move.
Please.
I'll move that council adopts a revised asset management policy number 3.10 as attached in this report, effective 27th of October 2020.
Can I have a second? Councillor Robinson, thank you. Would you like to speak to that?
It's
Deputy
pretty
Mayor
self-explanatory, Mayor. Quite happy with the report that we've got, so.
Councillor Robinson.
Likewise, Mayor, I'm very happy with the draft policy.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, I'd like to address the General Manager to page 83 of the attachments to Council. The table that shows asset groups and life shows roads 3 to 90 in years, and in the subnote it indicates the roads asset group indicates a range of useful life 10 to 100. Could I have that corrected, please?
Well,
Through
yes.
you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for picking that up, Councillor, and I was going to raise that if you hadn't. So that is an error. The paragraph below the table should also read 3 to 90 years. And the 10 to 100 years did appear in the previous iteration of the asset management plan. And I don't know, I can't recall whether we had this discussion or not when we discussed the draft at the workshop, but 3 years reflects the required resheeting of gravel roads, which is very much part of our asset management. Hence, that's changed to 3. So, thank you, Councillor Brini, for picking it up. So the life for roads range is 3 to 90, not 10 to 100.
Thank you.
That'll be correct.
Councillor Churchill.
I just have a question through the Mayor to the General Manager. Just on page 85, at the top, we've got point 1 there. It says, review this asset management policy every 2 years. Now, under the Act and in the policy review on the next page, it says to review at least every 4 years. Would it be better if it were consistent, or is there a reason for needing to do it every 2 years, or are we just doing overkill here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Churchill, it's not overkill, and the reason for us doing it every 2 years is in the initial stages anyway, given that a lot of this is new ground in terms of council's asset management plan development. We feel a need to be reviewing it more often than the 4-year period.
Very good.
I think over a period of time we will get back to not having to do that. But I just want to make the point that there's a lot of, even when you council, when we workshop the long-term financial plan, which will be coming up, which feeds into this, which is very much part of the PID, you will understand that we really should be reviewing this plan every 2 years, initially anyway.
Thanks for that explanation. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Well, I now put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, item 75, 7.5, page 39.
7.4.
Oh, I'm sorry, I've turned over to it once. Ah, yes, 7.4. This is a request to rescind grants auspiced by the council policy number 3.1. I had to look up auspiced. I've got 3 dictionaries. I couldn't find the word, and I guessed it's verbalisation of a noun. Is that right, or something?
It means to support.
Support, I see.
Auspiced.
So it's no more than support. It doesn't require any further action than that.
Auspiced means...
Councillor Breeny, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that council rescinds the grants auspiced by council policy 3.1 effective 27th of October 2020.
Now, do I have a seconder? Councillor Robinson. Councillor Breeny, Councillor Breeny, would you like to speak to this motion?
Definitely.
Please do.
I think we need to very carefully consider the issue of council's involvement in community projects, how it's done, and what council's commitment to these projects should and could be. It's clear from the report, and I thank through you, Mayor, thanks to the General Manager for the report. It's very clear as to what is intended here, and the reasons given seem to be, to me at least, to be quite supportable. There are concerns that have been raised by community groups, and I fully understand their concerns. For example, they need community groups focus on the need for clarity in dealing with council. They need clarity as to what council can do for them, how far we can go, what we can't do for them. In other words, make sure that they don't expect council to be doing something that they automatically assume council can do. For example, do they know how much funding is required, how much time is required by council staff to project manage things that they may think council should be responsible for managing. Council may be the only authority that has enough expertise in staff, etc., and access to consultants who can manage certain projects that involve sometimes quite substantial amounts of money and a requirement to provide information to the grant providers as to how those finances are being dealt with. In dealing with the existing policy, it seems to me that it is open-ended. It is not clear as to exactly what council is and isn't responsible for. It's left up to either the council staff or the council's general manager or councillors themselves, like us, to decide on just how far council will go, rather than the community coming to us knowing exactly what council can and can't do. So to rescind this auspicing policy seems to be the first step I would like to see. But in order to provide the community organisations and individuals who want to apply for grants and expect council's assistance, at least verbally, at least tacitly, pardon me, they need to be aware of just exactly what they're in for. They need clarity of the role of council, and I would see that at least council should have some sort of guidelines. I'm not sure if a policy is applicable because every case is different and you can't cover every case with a policy, but at least a set of guidelines of some sort as to what to expect if you ask council for a letter of support, if you ask council for in-kind support, if you ask council to project manage. What are you actually going to get? Because it seems to me that some projects that have been put forward, there is an expectation that council does everything, and we can't do that. What it will do, if you provide those guidelines, is it ensures council's not committed to unsustainable financial risk, first thing. Second thing, it ensures that the essential duties of council staff are not compromised by having to deal with additional project management outside of their normal duties. They're already busy workload. And thirdly, and notwithstanding there'll be other reasons, it makes it clear and unambiguous to community groups exactly how councils are able or unable to assist individual group projects.
Councillor Robinson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just briefly through you, Mayor. When I first looked at this policy, I thought, it's supposed to be a policy for community grants and for communities to implement, but it seemed to me to be a policy that basically council were controlling, with the project officer being in charge of the whole thing. And to me, that's not what a community project's about. I agree with a lot of the things Councillor Brini has said, and I think if we're going to have a policy in relation to this, it certainly needs to be a different policy to this one, because council officers are very thinly spread at the moment. They've got too many hats to wear, and we don't have project officers to offer up. And I think if it's going to be a community grant that's going to be implemented, the community should have ownership of it. Letters of support from council, that's fine, and we can say, yes, we think it's a good project, but I don't think we should be in charge of the project as is indicated in this policy.
Thank you. Anyone else in favour of the motion? Councillor Churchill.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think Councillor Brini and Councillor Robinson have covered this pretty well, but I just wanted to point out the fact that this policy dates back to 2006 and has never been reviewed since 2006. And I wonder historically whether it still even applies in the current climate, whether the world hasn't moved on a bit and things are handled in a different way. And that is also supported by the General Manager's comment under Officer's comments where he states that research has been unable to find evidence of other councils offering the auspicing of grants on behalf of community groups. So I think we're probably out of step with councils on this, and there's probably another way, as councillors Brini and Robinson have pointed out, there's probably other ways to handle this, and I think we need to investigate that and remove this policy as it is. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak for the motion?
I would like to speak though.
Yeah, I understand. Now, Councillor Brini, you've already said something. Do you want to say more?
If I'm permitted, Mayor, yes.
Yes, you may be.
I'd like to address a comment that was made by Councillor Churchill in relation to part of the report that mentions that there is no evidence of council.
Some similar councils.
Yes, similar policies by other councils, whatever the wording was. It was raised in one of the representations to this item, and I was made aware of the fact that there was comments made about the fact that there was, in fact, assistance under this policy, or this type of policy, or this type of assistance offered to a local community group in Orford. And it may have mentioned a couple of instances. What I understand that situation may have occurred, but it may be worth noting, and it certainly was in my mind, as to not knowing exactly what the conditions of that assistance were, whether or not it was actually in line with the policy, or whether it was just a project where money was managed, or whether council was in fact one of the controlling groups who, obtained the funding along with those. It may be a very different issue as to what we're looking to do here, which is to get rid of a policy that seemingly binds council to something that they may not have intended to be bound to. And I think it may be worthwhile that in the future, if I could ask that maybe the issue of whether or not this has in fact been undertaken in the past and utilised in the past be brought back to council and just clarified if that's possible to do that. Thank you.
Councillor Arnold, do you wish to speak against the motion?
Necessarily want to speak for or against the motion.
Well, I'd like to
I would
hear
like
what you
to
have
just
to
make
say.
a statement.
Please make it.
And I accept everything that Councillor Braney and Councillor Churchill and Councillor Robinson have said, but I believe, and I accept that this policy is very old, and I accept that it needs to be brought into a more contemporary state. But the intent of this policy was to provide a means for community groups that were not incorporated to have the capacity to apply for grants. There are very few community groups that are not incorporated these days, but that doesn't mean that council should not be an auspicing body. Some groups do not have the skills or confidence to progress a community project without some guidance from council, but it's not all about money. Some common auspicing arrangements include one-off events such as art exhibitions, concerts, fairs or festivals, projects, program trials, incubation startup groups, local play groups and study groups, youth projects, sporting programs or competitions. It's not a matter of council offering to solely auspice grants. It's about the facility being available to community groups if they have a project that could benefit from council being involved. And we already are in some of the examples I've mentioned. I think it's also important for us to recognise that our Section 24 committees are not incorporated bodies, and generally, unincorporated bodies can't apply for grants. But equally, our Section 24 committees cannot become incorporated bodies. In general, auspicing can be necessary because an unincorporated group may find it difficult to obtain funding such as grants. Some funding bodies prefer to deal with one incorporated legal entity rather than a group of people. It's recognised these days that there is significant demand for limited grant money pools. It's really important to recognise that some funding bodies restrict grants to organisations with deductible gift recipient endorsement or tax concession charity status, which most often held by certain types of established organisations, including councils. To obtain deductible gift recipient or tax concession charity status can be a long and involved process. This policy should not be rescinded. It should be reviewed or renewed. There is an opportunity to develop a robust policy that will provide for our community groups, our Section 24 committees and volunteers to seek grants from other funding sources with assistance from council as an auspicing body. It doesn't mean that council actually has to write the grant applications or even manage the funds. It just means that council would be supporting our local community groups with all the means available to us. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Simons?
Yeah, and thanks to Councillor Braney and Churchill and Robinson for their comments, and I understand that policy does need work done to it, but I'd prefer to see that work done first and have something on the table before we actually rescind this policy. I think it's reasonable that we workshop that through in the first instance. I think as Councillor Arnold was saying, that it's reasonable that community groups can expect advice and some assistance in varying degrees at times for when they're applying for grants. I think they need to know that they can come and do that. I know with my time at the BCDA, there was a lot of community grants that we applied for that we just spoke to the manager about it, and then we talked to the councillors, and then the grant was applied for, and we got the grant, and the work was done, and council really didn't have any involvement with it, but we did need to talk to council about applying for the grant in the first instance. So, well, I'm happy to review the whole policy. I just think it still needs to be in place, and I'm not sure we need a project officer. I think it can be incorporated into the existing positions as when needed to be. And I just think it's really important that the community understands that they can come to council and get some help with grant applications at times and as necessary.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Woods.
Thank you. If I may concur, I've listened intently to the debate around the table, and I would have to say in some way, shape or form I agree with everyone here. However, I think my preference would be to defer this motion until there is another motion, another policy to take this place, the place of this one. To not have anything on the table here for the community with regards to auspices by council would be, I think, for want of a better word, probably waving a red rag to a bull. So I would like to see our council here today to defer this until we workshopped it, and then we have not necessarily this policy because it's so dated and it's so really it's dated. It needs work doing to it, but to make sure that that when we rescind this one, we have something to take its place. Thank you.
I want to say something about it, and I'm not sure whether I'm for or against it. I've been vacillating, and the question is, in my mind, do we vote for it today, or do we defer the vote to next council meeting? And I'll see Councillor Churchill has a comment to make.
I just, if I may,
Please.
and I know I've already had my say, but if we refer back to the policy, there's a commitment in that policy. So this policy could theoretically be used now, right this minute. And there's a commitment in there. If you read under implementation of the policy, it says, upon the notification of a successful grant application, the project officer must inform the relevant staff and begin implementation of the procedure. I mean, that is, in its current state, that is just fraught with danger. And I believe that the other way around is the way that we should do it. In other words, we should rescind this, and then we're not going to abandon the community. If the community comes to us tomorrow with something that they need, I'm sure that through the processes of council and with the aid of staff, their issues can be considered. I don't see any problem with that, and I would think that that would be normal, natural process. But I actually see this policy, didn't before, never looked at it before, but I see this policy as a current risk to council. We don't have a risk management committee to handle it. Okay, that could be handled by the audit panel. We'd have to have that put through as separate motion. But this one statement in there, this implementation process, at this point in time, we are committed through that policy, and that policy could be pointed at us tomorrow and used right there and right then. So I am not against connecting with the community and helping them through these processes, but I am against having a loaded gun sitting on the shelf ready to go off. And I really would like to emphasise that point. Thank you. Thanks for allowing me time.
Does anyone else want to say anything?
Just through you, Mr. Mayor, if I can just say something in regards to this. Last week a gentleman came in from representing one of these committees that we've just spoken about today, seeking, he obviously wasn't aware of this policy, but he was seeking assistance from council, significant assistance, and I turned him, and I had to politely inform him of our situation and the fact that I just couldn't provide that assistance. At that stage, not even having read this 3.1 policy, if he had, as Councillor Churchill points out, he could have said, well, you're actually saying in here that you have to. So I just want to make that point. I think rescinding the policy is the right decision at this point in time, because while it exists, we are open to risk. And I totally agree with the comments that have been made around the table. It should not be seen as us cutting off or divesting of our interest in community groups trying to do the right thing by their community. To the contrary, I think if we can clarify very clearly to them, and most of them don't understand the processes and the things that they've got to go through, the accruals, the financial side of things, the procurement process. I mean, the report doesn't go into a lot of detail about all that, but it's significant, and I think a lot of these groups would think more carefully about how they were going to approach these grants if they knew what had to come behind them. There's just another point I'd like to make, and it's not included in the report, is that if council had, say, precinct plans for its towns or its communities, plans that, like Triabunna tomorrow, which is more of a scheme plan, but maybe I'm talking along those lines, that it had a plan 10, 20 years down the track how it wanted its towns to look and develop.
We've got those.
Right, we've got them. Then grant people applying for grants, those should fit into those plans. Do you know what I'm saying? Rather than we end up with ad hoc bits of infrastructure just because someone has managed to secure a grant. That's just I'm just talking now from an asset management perspective. But I didn't want this report to be read. It's very important that we deal with this. It is very important. That's a pretty poor policy. Despite its age is irrelevant, it should have been reviewed, but it's just the wording in there is putting council at risk.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask the General Manager a question, please?
Yes, please.
It's just, I know we're talking about community groups and the like here, but the important side of this auspicing policy is the Section 24 committees that do attract federal government grant money. They cannot apply for that grant money on their own. They are not allowed to. That's the reality. Because they're not incorporated, but because they are part of council. So the only people that can actually apply for those Section 24 grant, that Section 24 or grant money that may come towards the Section 24 committee is council. So by rescinding this, does it mean that we will no longer, or our Section 24 committees will no longer be able to apply for grant money? Because rescinding this, we're saying that council will not accept or will not do grant applications, aren't we?
I can rule on that. I can tell you straight away that it is not a prohibition on Section 24 committees being able to get grants through council. This is dealing with the question of council having an obligation to assist various entities, incorporated or unincorporated entities, in seeking money. It's imposing an obligation on the council, not preventing the Section 24 committees obtaining funding through council or through council's efforts. It's similar, but it's not quite the same.
But Mr. Mayor, where does it give, if we rescind this policy, where does it then give the General Manager the authority to actually submit grant applications on behalf of a Section 24 committee. Because by removing this policy, we've taken away, in my view, the General Manager's authority from this council to do that.
Well, what I'm conducting a discussion really rather than
It's a
ruling
debate.
as a
It's a debate.
being involved in the debate rather than being a chairman. The thing that weighs on my mind is there's an obligation on council to do things if someone asks it to do it, as opposed to council making a decision of its own volition. And that will affect the way I vote on this. I do agree with you that people who are members of Section 24 committee, whether they being National Resource Management or other forms of committees, they do need support, they do need money, and if the federal government's offering it and it can be wisely used, then council ought to support them. But it ought to be council's decision, not something that's forced on council because of a formal policy. Now, does anyone else want to make a comment? Councillor Simon still.
I think Councillor Churchill was in before me.
If I may, I'm
Please.
sorry that, I know this is taking up more time, we possibly should.
Well,
but,
it's important. Please go ahead.
It is, but if I may say, if this policy has been what's been authorising us to handle grant money so far, we are totally non-compliant with the policy, because none of this stuff's gone past any risk management committee in the past. So if this policy complies now, then we've been breaching all sorts of things if it's required to get that grant money, which I don't believe it is, in fact. However, well, that's really my final point. I just think this policy is so out of date, places it's so much risk.
Thank you, Councillor Churchill, you've said that.
We shouldn't be doing it. Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right. Councillor Simons.
I just wanted to make a point on the procedure, part 4 of the policy and part A, as far as the, and as Councillor Churchill said, we don't have a risk management committee, but it says there all projects for which a grant is being applied for should be submitted to the risk management committee for review if considered appropriate. So to me, that is when it gets a yes or a no, if it's to go any further. So really, I suppose what we're missing is a risk management committee.
Councillor Robinson.
Just a quick point, and through you, Mayor, to Councillor Arnold, who probably knows more about S24 committees than I do. Councillors are representatives on the S24 committees, and we're there for advice and to report back to council. So if an S24 committee has an idea for a grant, cannot the councillor that's representing council on that committee come back to council and suggest that as a possible application for council for a grant? Is that a way of getting around what you're saying, S24 committees not being able to apply for grants? I know it's not a direct way, but that could be a way of circumventing that.
I don't really know, but if I may, Mr Mayor, the group that the General Manager was talking about, I believe, is a Section 24 Committee of Council.
Correct?
Yes.
Correct, Councillor.
And so there's no avenue for that group. They're not incorporated because they're established under under legislation. So they're not incorporated. So unless they do the grant application, I don't know how they're going to be able to put in a grant application if they can't use council's name.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just clarify that, if you're referring to my previous comments, it wasn't about, councillor, about getting the money, getting the grant, it was managing the project, doing the construction, organising the contractors, doing the tendering and procurement.
Okay, no, the Section 24 Committee should do that themselves.
Yep.
Yep.
Councillor Braney.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the General Manager. My understanding is that S24 committees can't commit council to any commitment. They may in their meeting move to ask council for permission to do something, but it is up to council in the end to decide whether or not that S24 committee can in fact go for a grant, etc.
And if I may.
Please go
Mayor,
ahead.
That's absolutely correct. Councillor Browning is absolutely correct. But if we don't have a policy in relation to auspicing, how are they going to achieve those? How are they going to achieve that?
Not through you, Mayor, I would suggest that every S24 committee should be aware that if they would like to get grant funding, that they request the council apply for it. If they aren't incorporated bodies, they can't apply anyway.
No, they can't.
And therefore, well, in most grants you can't. But for example, the hub committee in the S24 committee for the Swansea hub has a tenure that was supposed to and will be a short tenure, on the grounds that that committee auspices, if you like, the formation of a hub committee, which is incorporated. It has a set of, I suppose, it has a constitution, terms of reference, etc. It's an incorporated body, totally separate to council, that takes on the responsibility as an incorporated body then from council to apply for funding on the grounds that they can't apply for any funding usually without some sort of approval from council for their application for the grant. In other words, the grant body will require some sort of commitment from the landowner, council, or the asset owner, council, to allow that incorporated committee, which is not an S24 committee, to undertake the loan, the grant, sorry, not loan.
For Councillor Brennan, I want to make a comment here, putting on my legal hat. Whether or not Section 24 committees have independent existence is a matter of looking at the Local Government Act and the Section 24 itself. It seems to me it could well be that Section 24 committee is part of council, but it has only the powers given to it by means of the Act. I'd be very surprised if it had the power to raise money, but it might have the power to have, through council, de facto control of certain sorts of money. But all this is a legal question. The question really before us now is whether or not we should take away the obligations contained in this particular policy. And it seems obvious from what's been said that if we vote in favour of taking away this obligation imposed upon council, it seems obvious that we ought to have a council workshop dealing with the question of the very important things that have been raised by Councillor Arnold and Councillor Simons and have been queried by Deputy Mayor Woods and have been nagging in the back of my mind. Now, do we want any more discussion or shall we put the motion?
Put the motion.
All those in favour of the motion? I'm going to vote to rescind. There are four. There's Councillor Robinson, Councillor Breeny, Councillor Churchill and Mayor Young in favour of the motion. Those against? There is Councillor Simons, Councillor Arnold and Deputy Mayor Woods against.
Thank you.
And as a result of that, I would ask the General Manager to put on the section, to put on the next workshop a question of Section 24 committees and their capacity to seek funds either directly or indirectly through council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to add to that then, I will do that, and I think I haven't had the time, but it'll allow me time to look at the councils that we did look at that don't have a policy. Dorset, Break of Day, Southern Midlands, Tasman, they're all similar councils to us, and how they get it, and how they've got around it, because obviously they have and do.
Thank you very much. Now, I think it takes us to the next item, page 39 on the agenda, curbside vendor application.
Mayor, I'll move that council issues a curbside vendor stallholder licence to Ben and Emily Fleming, Governors Bigelow, to trade from Wolves Bay next to the Surf Life Saving Club.
Do I have a councillor Simons. Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mayor. I
Councillor
think it
Simon?
was, the report was sufficient for me to make that judgment, so thank you.
Councillor Simons, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, it's fine. The report was very self-explanatory and well done. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to make a comment? I put the motion in. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Application under the Community Small Grants Program, Bicheno Community Development Association Incorporated.
I move the motion, please.
Is there a motion?
Yes, there is.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Woods, what
Yes.
is the motion?
I'll move that council approves a grant of $1,600 to the Bicheno Community Development Association towards the cost of staging Wander Round, an artist residency to be held in Bicheno, January 2021.
Now, you said $1,600?
Yes.
Do I have a seconder for the motion? A seconder, Councillor Branning. Too late, Councillor Churchill. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to speak. I moved $1,600 because we have the ability to up the ante, if I may, if that's the right word. This is a really good, under the circumstances that we are living in today, this is a really good project for us to support. It says here on page 42, the organisers have identified a freelance publicist who has quoted $1,600 for the work which will help to achieve the above publicity goals. That's why I thought I would move it for $1,600, and again, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in, any support that we can give any community group in this regard, I think is worthy.
I'm going to ask, is there any speak against this motion? Well, I put the motion. Please raise your hand if you're in favour of it. I declare the motion carried unanimously. Next item is page 44. Application under the Community Small Grants Program, Lions Club of Springs Bay. Is there a motion? Councillor Simons.
I'll move that council approves a grant of $1,000 to the Lions Club of Spring Bay towards the staging of the 2020 Christmas Parade in Triabunna.
Second to Councillor Robinson. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, it's been an ongoing parade in Triabunna from what I know, and
Is
it's
there
well
any,
supported, so good.
Discussion against the motion? I put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, next item, page 44, item 7.8, request for letter of support, Get Into It, Healthy Heart, Healthy Mind Community Project. Now, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I'll move.
Oh, well, thank you, Councillor
That
Arnold.
council retrospectively endorses the letter of support provided to Ms Sally Fletcher and Ms Nicola Gadd from the Mayor on behalf of council in support of their application for funding through Healthy Tasmania for the running of the Get Into It, Healthy Heart, Healthy Mind community project.
Do you wish, is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Simons. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
Not really, Mr Mayor, other than to say I think given what we've all been through over the last several months with COVID, this is something that we need to be very mindful of supporting, and I wish the applicants for the project all the luck in the world to actually get it up and running in our municipal area.
Is there any, I've got to ask, is there any speaker against it? If that's the case, saying it's running late, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, looks as if I've already signed the letter, doesn't it? Although I couldn't have spoken against that, should I? Now, which page you on to now? Page
48.
48, are we?
Probably the same as this one.
The General Manager says the same with this one, but letter for support improving the playing field funding, Freycinet Association Incorporation. Now, Councillor Breeny, in favour of this motion?
I'd like to put the motion, and I'd also like to make a comment on it that I missed out on last time. I move that Council A retrospectively endorses the letter of support provided to Ms Jo Pickering, representing the Freycinet Association Incorporated on the Coles Bay Community Gym project from the Mayor on behalf of Council in support of the Association's application through the Improving the Playing Field for grant funding towards the construction of a community gym on the land owned by the Freycinet Sports and Community Club, and B, it is acknowledged that this letter of support does not constitute planning and or building approval for the construction of the proposed Coles Bay Community Gym.
Now, in order to circumvent things, is anyone against it?
Oh, you've got to get a seconder and I've
No,
just done that.
thank you very much, Councillor Arnold, second. Is anyone against it?
Needs to speak.
I need to,
Well, but if you're not against it, I think we can put the motion.
I need to correct the report.
Pardon?
I need to correct the report,
Okay.
or at least comment on the report.
Please comment then.
In the last paragraph above the officer's recommendation, both to items 7.8 and 7.9, it indicated that 7 of the 8 councillors responded, and based on the responses it was considered that there was sufficient support for the letter of support to be provided. I'd just like to clarify that I may have been the 8th councillor who didn't reply because I wasn't around at the time,
Oh, I see.
and I would have supported it at
And
the
you
time.
retrospectively support?
I'm
Thank you very
retrospectively
much.
supporting it. Thank you.
All those in favour of the motion, please raise their hand. Against? I declare the motion carried unanimously. Now, I think the next item is notices of motion. There are none. The next item, petition. There are none. Next item, questions without notice from councillors. There is one. Deputy Mayor Woods, please.
It's actually 2.
Oh, there are
I've got 2 questions, if I
Please
may,
ask.
through you to the General Manager, please. The first question is to ask the General Manager if he believed that the Section 24 Committee of Council Statement of Expectations has reached the end of the process set out by its terms of reference, and if you are satisfied by its achievements, will you investigate its disbandment for the next meeting of Council in November? I'll give you
Can I stop that for a moment? I assume you don't want an answer to that question now?
No. These are taken on notice.
Okay.
Yep. So that's, Ms Higgins,
That's
I'll
fine.
give this to you after. And the second question is
Is-
also, it just pertains to the
Please go on with it.
very long and involved conversation that we all had just recently with regards to the Prosser River
Advisory group.
Prosser River Mouth Master Plan Advisory Group. And again, through you, Mayor, to the General Manager, given the amount of time that has lapsed with regards to this particular committee and the lack of progression and its perceived turmoil on the subject that it's raised in the community, again, I ask if you could investigate the disbandment of this committee and bring it to us at our workshop and consequently to council on the November meeting for a decision. The reason why I'm saying this about these committees is, or in this one in particular, this situation is very complex. It's quite polarising to the community, has been for 2 years now or more, and it's time that a decision should be made with regards to it, and I believe that the decision should actually come back to council and we should be, we as a collective group of councillors and staff need to make a decision on behalf of the communities in a very transparent way. This committee, with all due respect to all that sit on it, from me to them, I personally thank them for taking their time out to be on it, but it has been polarising, it has been divisive, and we need to move, or community needs to see that something is happening, and I can't see myself personally going forward that anything's going to happen in the near future. So that's why I asked you, Mr. General Manager, to do the investigation as to how we go about this. Again, Ms Higgins, I'll give you these questions for later.
Thank you,
Thank
Deputy
you.
Mayor Woods. Now, the next item is confidential items in the closed session. I assume that I don't read out the contents of the confidential items. So accordingly, I move that the council, I can't move. Councillor Simons, a seconder.
I'll move that council moves into closed session at 3:39.
Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Churchill. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Well, that ends the open session of council.
Have you turned